Imagine building the greatest empire in the Americas. Now, imagine doing it on the edge of a cliff, miles above sea level. Meet the Inca. They ruled a territory stretching over 2,500 miles along the deadliest mountain range on Earth. But here is the punchline. They did all of this without horses, without iron tools, and without even inventing the wheel. Yet the Qhapaq Inca, the supreme emperor living high up in the mountains, regularly dined on fresh fish from the Pacific Ocean. How? Through a mind-boggling network of human runners and an engineering marvel that defies modern logic. Welcome to the Qhapaq Ñan, the Great Inca Road, a 25,000-mile superhighway carved directly into the stone of the Andes. To put that into perspective, if you unrolled this ancient road, it would wrap entirely around the Earth at the equator. It was longer and more complex than the famous Roman road network and built in a fraction of the time. But the Romans built on flat European plains. The Inca had to build through freezing glaciers, scorching deserts, and bottomless canyons. Some sections of this road reached altitudes of over 16,000 feet. That is high enough to cause severe altitude sickness. And remember, they had no beasts of burden. Llamas are great, but they cannot carry heavy loads or be ridden by adults. Every single stone, every retaining wall, and every massive bridge was built using nothing but human muscle, stone tools, and sheer willpower. This was not just a road for casual travel. It was a tool of absolute state control, connecting over 10 million people. In fact, commoners were strictly forbidden from using the highway without official permission. It was the emperor's private internet. But when an empire encounters an impassable vertical cliff, how do they build a road? Simple. They build stairs to the sky. When modern engineers face a steep mountain, they build winding, zigzag roads to make the climb easier for vehicles. But the Inca didn't have vehicles. So they looked at a vertical rock face and said, let's just go straight up. They carved thousands upon thousands of stone steps directly into the mountainside. Some staircases stretched for miles into the clouds. These weren't your gentle modern stairs. They were incredibly steep, very narrow, and often bordered by a sheer, terrifying drop-off. One wrong step, and you wouldn't stop falling until you hit the valley floor thousands of feet below. Why choose such an exhausting, gravity-defying route? Simple. It was the absolute fastest way from point A to point B. And since their pack animals were llamas, who happened to be excellent mountain climbers, steep stairs were no problem for them. However, building a massive staircase on a mountain creates a huge problem when it rains. It turns into a deadly waterfall. To prevent the road from washing away, the Inca engineered brilliant drainage systems directly into the rock. They built stone culverts and channels that diverted rain and melting snow safely off the cliffside, keeping the stairs completely dry. They also constructed massive retaining walls to hold the mountain itself in place, preventing catastrophic landslides. Even today, 500 years later, many of these staircases and drainage channels still work perfectly. It was a triumph of engineering over gravity, but climbing these stairs was brutal, lung-busting work. Yet, the Chasqui runners sprinted up these vertical paths at full speed, day and night, carrying the emperor's messages. But what happens when the mountain simply stops, and there is nothing but a bottomless gorge in the way? The Andes are violently split by massive, roaring rivers, carving canyons that drop thousands of feet into the earth. You cannot build stone stairs across thin air. And the Inca did not have steel, iron, or even the concept of the arch. So, how do you cross a deadly chasm? The Inca engineers looked down at the ground and found their answer. Grass. Specifically, a tough local mountain grass called ichu. It sounds like a terrible, flimsy material for a bridge, right? But when woven together, it becomes incredibly strong. The process involved entire communities working in perfect harmony. Women and children would weave the grass into small cords, which the men would then twist into massive cables as thick as a human torso. These giant cables were hauled across the canyon and securely anchored to massive stone pillars deeply buried on either side. Brave workers would then dangle over the abyss, rapidly lacing the floor and handrails together to form a beautiful suspension bridge. These were the famous Inca rope bridges. The most famous one, Qhapaq, spanned over 100 feet across the Apurimac River. For our Chasqui runner, crossing was a nightmare. The bridge would sway wildly and bounce with every step in the violent mountain winds. Yet it was an absolute engineering marvel. It was highly flexible, practically earthquake-proof, and incredibly durable. When the Spanish conquistadors arrived, they were terrified of these swaying grass traps. But they were shocked to find the bridges could easily support fully armored soldiers and horses. There was just one fatal flaw. Grass rots. A bridge like this would naturally decompose and snap after a year or two. The Inca solution? They didn't care. Every single year, local villages would gather, cut down the old bridge, and weave a brand new one in just 3 days. It is a brilliant triumph of community over permanent materials. In fact, local communities still rebuild the Qhapaq Bridge every year, keeping a 500-year-old tradition alive. To keep an empire of 10 million souls from falling apart, the Inca created the ultimate logistics network, the Chasqui. They were elite runners stationed at relay huts spaced miles apart. When a Chasqui approached a hut, he would blow a pututu shell to signal his arrival. The next runner would be waiting, ready to take the message and sprint off instantly, covering the next leg of the journey. These relay stations, or tambos, were stocked with food and water, ensuring the runners never had to stop to rest or eat. They fueled up on the go. Imagine a marathon runner eating a full meal while sprinting up a mountain. This system was so fast that the emperor could enjoy fresh fish from the coast delivered to the highlands in under 48 hours. By some estimates, they covered over 150 miles in a single day. That's faster than most horses. But what were they carrying? They didn't have writing. Instead, they used the Quipu, a series of knotted strings that held census data, tax records, and even history, a binary system of information storage. With these stations, the Inca could move messages across their entire vast empire, from the snow-capped Andes to the dry coastal deserts. Think of it as a human-powered network that could send information faster than any other pre-modern society. This system allowed the Sapa Inca to keep his finger on the pulse of every corner of his vast, rugged kingdom. Today, parts of this ancient road and the memory of the Chasquis remain as a testament to Inca ingenuity. But building the roads was just the beginning. The Inca had another monumental challenge. How do you manage a massive population without money? To understand that, we need to talk about their bizarre tax system and the curious absence of currency. The Inca Empire was arguably the largest moneyless economy in human history. There were no markets, no merchants, and no currency. Instead, they used a labor tax system called mita. You didn't pay the government in gold, you paid them in sweat. Every citizen owed a few months of labor each year. This workforce built the roads and, more importantly, the tampas. Tampus were state-run rest stops, spaced precisely 1 day's walk apart along the entire 25,000-mile highway. For a traveling army or a tired Chasqui runner, a tampu was like an ancient 5-star hotel. It had warm beds, fresh weapons, and lots of food. But keeping thousands of rest stops stocked with food across a massive empire is tricky. Without refrigerators, food rots. So, the Inca invented a genius solution: freeze drying. High up in the Andes, the nights are absolutely freezing. They would leave potatoes out to freeze at night. Then, under the scorching daytime sun, they would stomp on them to squeeze out all the moisture. Repeat this process and you get Chuño, a freeze-dried potato that looks and feels exactly like a rock. If you try to eat it raw, you will break your teeth. But if you soak it in hot water, it becomes a nutritious meal that can last up to 10 years without rotting. To store this magic food, the Inca built massive storehouses called kulkas high on the hillsides. They were strategically placed to catch the freezing mountain wind, acting as massive natural refrigerators. Because of this massive surplus, if a drought hit and crops failed, the state would open the kulkas. Nobody went hungry. The Inca controlled millions of people, a massive road network, and mountains of food, all running like a flawless machine. But keeping track of all this labor, food, and people requires massive amounts of data. And remember, they didn't know how to write. Every major civilization needed a way to record taxes, population, and inventory. Usually, this meant inventing an alphabet. But the Inca didn't write. They used this, the Quipu, a complex system of knotted strings. It worked like an ancient database. Different colored strings represented different categories, like red for the army or yellow for corn. The knots themselves acted as a base 10 mathematical system. Knots at the bottom were units, then tens, hundreds, and thousands at the top. To manage this, the Inca employed specialized accountants called Quipu. They were essentially ancient data scientists. They could read and write into these knotted strings with incredible speed and accuracy, treating them like physical hard drives. When the emperor needed a population count or a tax report, a Chasqui runner would transport these Quipu hard drives across the mountains. Because of the Quipu, the Inca government knew exactly how much food was in every storehouse and how many men could fight in every village. But then, the Spanish arrived. They looked at these complex mathematical strings and could not understand them at all. Believing the Quipus were works of the devil or pagan witchcraft, the conquistadors gathered them up and burned them in massive bonfires. In those fires, centuries of Inca history, poetry, and scientific data vanished into ash. Almost the entire memory of an empire was wiped out. Today, only a few hundred Quipus survive in museums. Modern computers and scientists are still struggling to fully crack their complex code. So the Inca conquered the mountains with perfect roads, defeated starvation with freeze-dried food, and managed data with string. But the Andes hides one more deadly threat. A force of nature that easily destroys modern steel and concrete cities. Massive earthquakes. So how did their giant stone buildings survive magnitude 9.0 quakes when they didn't even use a single drop of mortar? The secret lies in a technique called Ashlar masonry. The stones were cut to fit together so perfectly that not even a piece of paper could fit between them. And remember, they achieved this level of precision without iron or steel. They used harder river stones to endlessly pound and shape the massive blocks. Instead of uniform rectangles, many stones had multiple angles, interlocking like a massive three-dimensional jigsaw puzzle. When a massive earthquake strikes, these dry stone walls do something incredible. They dance. The lack of mortar allows the stones to bounce and move with the earth's tremors, and then settle right back into their original positions. The Inca also designed their doors and windows in a trapezoid shape, tilting inward to bear massive weight and resist lateral forces. Even the walls themselves leaned slightly inward, making the entire structure incredibly stable against the violent shaking of the Andes. Fast forward to the Spanish conquest. The Europeans built their own colonial churches right on top of the ancient Inca foundations. The Spanish used uniform bricks and traditional wet mortar, assuming their European engineering was vastly superior. Then, a massive earthquake hit the city of Cusco. The results were absolutely humiliating for the conquerors. The rigid, mortared Spanish buildings cracked, crumbled, and completely collapsed into dust. But underneath all that Spanish rubble, the ancient Inca foundation stood perfectly intact, calmly surviving the disaster. This legendary engineering is why sites like Machu Picchu still proudly sit on top of fault lines today, practically untouched by time. The Inca built an indestructible road and communication system to unite the greatest empire in the Americas. But tragically, it was this exact perfect highway that would guarantee their absolute destruction. In 1532, Spanish conquistador Francisco Pizarro landed on the coast of South America with a tiny army of just 168 men. Conquering an empire of millions hidden behind these impenetrable peaks seemed mathematically impossible. But then, the Spanish found something unbelievable. A perfectly paved, massive superhighway leading straight to the Inca capital. The very road system designed to unify and protect the empire allowed the Spanish to march right into its heart. With horses, animals the Inca had never seen before, and steel armor, the Spanish army moved faster than the Inca ever imagined possible. In a tragic twist of fate, the greatest engineering achievement of the Inca became the exact tool of their downfall. After the conquest, the Spanish didn't know how to maintain the complex drainage systems or the grass bridges. Without the Mita labor tax and careful Inca maintenance, large sections of the Qhapaq Ñan were swallowed by the jungle. But despite centuries of neglect, extreme weather, and earthquakes, thousands of miles of this ancient highway still survive today. It stands as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, still walked daily by the descendants of the brilliant people who built it. The Inca proved that you don't need the wheel, iron tools, or even a written alphabet to build a masterpiece. All you need is human muscle, woven grass, and a breathtaking amount of sheer determination. They looked at the most impossible, deadly mountain range on Earth and simply decided to conquer it. The Great Inca Road remains one of the greatest monuments to human willpower in the history of the world. If you want to uncover more secrets of lost empires, smash that subscribe button. See you in the next adventure.